Dia Trambitas, Head of Product, and David Talby, CTO, both of John Snow Labs. Welcome to the Data Exchange podcast.
Thank you for inviting. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
All right. So this is a deep dive into the use of natural language processing and natural language technologies in healthcare broadly, but healthcare, pharma, and biotech. All right. So for our audience who are not familiar with NLP in these industries and domains, so Dia, what are some current applications of NLP in healthcare and the life sciences more broadly?
Well, we do have a couple of more popular use cases that we regularly work on, such as clinical data abstraction, for instance. And this refers to the process of identifying and then extracting clinical or demographic data points, such as diagnoses or test results or symptoms and procedures from unstructured clinical documents, such as the notes within electronic health records. So a big portion of relevant health data is available only in textual format, and it is quite difficult to analyze it in an aggregate manner. And this is why we are doing this type of abstraction in order to collect data and to obtain a structured data set out of the unstructured text. Now, one of the purposes why we are doing this, for instance, is to create disease registries. Those are databases of facts about patients who are affected by particular conditions or more important diseases such as cancer or Alzheimer or chronic pain or congenital malformations and so on. Now, currently, those registries are manually filled in by people who are highly trained professionals. And this work is mostly manual work, right? So they go through the electronic health records and they pick up the data points and then they fill in the forms for the cancer registries. Now, as you might imagine, this takes a lot of time and effort, and it costs a lot of money. So, for instance, there are approximately 300 data points that need to be filled in for cancer registries. Those data points usually refer to patient demographics or to different tumor-related data such as site or laterality or different details about the patient's previous conditions and so on.
So generally, Dia, it's like you have unstructured text and you extract information, put it in a database, and then now people can query and ask questions. They can they can do counts, they can do reports. So basically from unstructured to structured.
Exactly. So this is the end goal, right? And then we, of course, we can apply the same principles to clinical trial analysis, because there we also have tens of thousands of documents per clinical trial. We can do the same for analysis of real-world data evidence. So after the actual clinical trial finishes, we start asking questions such as how will a particular drug or therapy behave in real-world conditions, right? And in order to do that, you have to analyze real-world data, which comes from different sources as well, such as electronic health records or insurance claims or adverse event reports, or I don't know, maybe voice of the customers via different patient forums or via social media and so on. So all of that is unstructured text, and we want to analyze it at scale, if possible, via automatic tools and methods, and to be able to exploit it more efficiently later on.
So there's probably no single answer to my next question, but for those of us who don't work in healthcare, what I start thinking about when you were describing this kind of information extraction step is accuracy, because it seems like, so what is the acceptable level of error in healthcare? In other words, obviously any kind of information extraction is not going to be 100% correct, right? So or is that the goal, to get us close to 100%? So how accurate do these things have to be in healthcare?
Well, 100%. If you are the patient who is being, under scope, and if this data relates to you, you want it to be very accurate, like 100% accurate.
But then Dia, human extractors are not 100% accurate either, right?
Yes, that's true. And recent developments in deep learning and in machine learning have topped human performance in different tasks. But of course, they are not 100% accurate. And this is why we want to keep human in the loop. So we offer tools for clinicians and for health experts to quicker analyze text, but we also give them evidence from where this data was extracted so that they can judge at the end if the data is correct or not. Right, so they are the ones taking the responsibility for the decision, for the clinical decision taken at the end of the day.
So which brings me to my next question. So you said human in the loop. So what is the typical pipeline then?
There are different types of tasks that are supported and that can be chained into a pipeline. So first of all, the most basic one is name entity recognition, right? So this implies the extraction of entities such as, symptoms, diseases, drugs, tests, results, and so on from those narrative medical reports. Now, once those entities are detected in the text, we want to know if they relate to the current patient, if they are denied, or if they are present, if they relate to somebody else in the patient family, maybe for some close family members, or if the condition or symptom happens all the time, or for instance, it is conditioned by something. For instance, shortness of breath when climbing stairs, right? So this is called assertion status detection. So it's another task. Then we also have relation extraction, which is also related to name entity recognition. So let's assume that we have already identified relevant entities in the target text. Now the problem is to see how they relate to each other, right? So one popular example is the detection of temporal relations between clinical events. So in this case, the model tries to detect if an event occurred before, after, or if they overlap, if it overlaps with another event. Now, for instance, the relation between drugs and adverse events. So it's very relevant to know if you are taking a drug because you have some problem or some pain or some symptom, or the symptom happened after you start taking the drug, right? So this type of relations. Then it's also maybe often relevant to do entity resolution and entity coding. That refers to a type of normalization of the extracted or the identified entities with respect to some standard taxonomies or standard codes.
So this, so everything you've described is chained together in the use case, but possibly in the use case you described, which is this kind of information extraction use case. But then, so let me ask you this: so is there a move in this space, and maybe David can answer this, to build something that's end-to-end instead of having 4 models, just do one end-to-end? The reason I ask this question is in speech, they do have kind of this pipeline of models, but then there's a group of people who are trying to see maybe we can just build one end-to-end model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say not yet in healthcare. What is definitely happening is that you put everything in a pipeline. And usually in a real application, you would not have 4 stages in the pipeline, you would have closer to 40 or 50.
Oh my.
Yes, exactly. Because you start with text and come say, oh, first I want to split it into headers, right? Because I have a chief complaint and history of present illness and physical exam and plan. Then I want to do sentence splitting. Then I want to tokenize. I want to do spell correction, which is unique to healthcare. Then I want to have I want to extract different types of entities, right? So I have medical entities, maybe biomedical entities, maybe anatomy, maybe social determinants, right? And then your assertion status, then I say I want to map to different terminologies and so on. What you definitely want to do, and those are different deep learning problems, right? Maybe different architectures that you optimize, different embeddings that you use, sometimes different pre-trained models. What you want to make sure you do is that you train everything as one pipeline, right? So one thing we do is you come and say, look, wait, you have your label data, you come and say, here's what I want to extract. You, in a sense, you want to train the entire pipe, right? And then what you experiment with is also, sometimes it's the ordering of the pipeline, right? Where can you reuse an existing model versus where you really have to tune, which embeddings you use. So there's a lot of that going on, definitely. One place where we are definitely doing that kind of unification that you talked about is with computer vision, with OCR. So sometimes what you need to deal with healthcare, you just get scanned images of things, of PDFs. It could be faxes, it could be really just PDFs that someone scanned, it could be clinical trial documents, right, that started with handwriting. And there definitely now we have models that combine the computer vision and NLP, so to do the information extraction directly from the images.
So Dia, when you were describing the sequence of models, it's almost like my immediate reaction is almost at every stage, this is very, very healthcare specific, right? So, and maybe even discipline specific within healthcare. So beyond kind of this specificity of the models, what are the other challenges for NLP in healthcare?
Oh, NLP in healthcare is very challenging. So there are a couple of reasons why. So first of all, there is a very special language which is used within those health records. And the language is specific to, as you mentioned before, to the medical field in general, but also to subspecialties within the medical field, right? So people spend years learning how to understand and to speak those languages, right, during the medical school. Now, why is it so hard? So first of all, because of the very specialized vocabularies which are used within those documents. And just to give you an example, the UMLS, the Unified Medical Language System, includes more than 200 vocabularies, right, for English alone, which corresponds to more than 3 million terms. So those are highly specialized terms which are normally only used in healthcare, right? So you have to have models which are specific, which understand those types of vocabularies and words. Then the healthcare notes have a very different grammar and very special semantics associated with the text constructs that they use. So the text has its own definition of what a sentence is and how the sentences are structured. They usually don't have punctuation marks or capitalized words, right? So they have, you can often encounter stuff like clause nausea. What does it mean for regular people? For normal people, that does not make any sense, right? Or constructs such as since yesterday 10 per 10. That means in medical terms that there is a pain level of 10 out of 10, right? But normal people don't understand that. Also from a content point of view, so those notes taken or written by specialists in radiology or dermatology or orthopedics usually cover very different things or very different data points and points of view of the same patient, right? And sometimes even doctors across those specialties, they don't understand each other, right? Because some of the things are very specific.
So now, is there also, Dia, is there also localization involved? In other words, notes by a doctor in London are very different than notes by a doctor in Boston.
So usually there are constructs or special vocabularies used within the hospital and within different departments, right? So not necessarily across cities or across regions in the same country, but even in different hospitals, people are used to using different constructs, right? So off-the-shelf NLP libraries and algorithms built just for English will practically fail on this type of documents. And I'm not referring here only to the most complex tasks such as NER or entity resolution, but even the simplest one like tokenization or sentence detection or part of speech tagging, for instance, which just fail on the majority of those sentences, right? So we have to train specialized models which know how to handle this type of text and constructs.
This is why every NLP survey we have, people always say tuning and customizing models is what they need. Because even if they read about these fancy models that are in the open source, they can't really use them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes, and what I would say, look, even like two doctors in Boston in the same specialty often would really not write the same way.
So let me ask you folks this. So so you need some data then, you need data to tune these models. So I guess that's part of the offering that you folks provide in the non-open source, right? So there's Spark NLP, and then there's the healthcare models. So someone who wants to train all of these healthcare models will have to do what in terms of data gathering?
So we already offer pre-trained models for majority of those tasks I mentioned before.
No, but if someone, Dia, if someone doesn't want to use your models and say, hey, I can do this myself. Yep. So this is your chance to dissuade them from doing it themselves. So what does it entail to build these models?
Sure.
It's very simple, actually. I mean, very simple. No, what they need to acquire is a team of experts who are willing and have time and interest to prepare data for training those models. Now, this means that you have to get your hands on the right data, right, which is not obvious all the time because of all the privacy and security concerns in healthcare. Then you have to annotate data in a consistent manner, and there are several problems here when preparing high quality annotated data for model training. And then you have to experiment with different types of architectures for model training for specific tasks and for specific.
And you need to do this in as frictionless a way as possible, because the people labeling the data are experts and are expensive. Their time is expensive.
Exactly.
Yes, a medical doctor. Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that there are two things you'll need to do on your own if you want to do this. One is just the algorithms, the architecture themselves, because just the actual deep learning models are just different for healthcare. So you wouldn't use in any R that you use for public for biomedical or clinical domain as well. The other thing, yeah, absolutely the data. We have a sizable team of clinicians who do this. And yes, you need people who are specialists. And then you need to build a process where they actually agree with each other, right? Because the different people within healthcare disagree on, how we define cancer staging, right, for these kind of patients, right? How do you define when someone has a substance abuse problem? How do you even define when someone is a smoker or not, right? So there's probably there are several pages of fine print, right? And the edge cases, because we're talking about individual people, and the edge cases are super important. Right.
And as Dia alluded to, there's not a lot of tolerance for error in this domain.
Correct. Yes. Yes, and also you have to be very, very specific clinically, right? So when you say that, even really taking a super simple example, you take that someone is a smoker, right? How exactly do you define that, right? Do they smoke now? Do they smoke regularly? Do they smoke how much they smoke? Did they smoke in the past? Right? Are they passive smokers? And for different applications, different clinical applications, those answers are really, really important, right? So if you do something that, sort of something in the middle, and you just let people do what they want, you're going to get labeling with, 60% agreement, right? 70% agreement, right? Which then, that's an upper limit on your accuracy, right? For whatever model, right? Because basically you have noise on top of that. So yeah, a lot of the effort is just getting enough data that's actually representative, right? Not biased in terms of patient population, right? As men, women, people with different diseases, background, looks real, right? And then actually have some clinically relevant data, right? And on top of it, of course, you have the data science work as well, right? Which is really its own, healthcare NLP, it's its own workshop, its own conferences, right? Even in the academic realm, and the benchmarks are different as well.
So let me pivot a little bit towards mapping what we're talking about, the broader trends in NLP and machine learning. So of course, when you talk about language, right now, the hot thing is these large language models, which I'm sure, Dia, you hear a lot about from your users about why do we, isn't there some magic large language model that we can just use? And why do these things have to be hard, right? So are large language models now somewhat relevant to healthcare NLP? Are they at the practical, useful stage? And either of you can answer this question.
They're a bit too large to use in production environments. So yeah, we have to find ways of downscaling them, right? In order to be practical in use. Yeah, I think.
So I think the people tend to confuse the large language models mainly with these super humongous ones that are basically generative models, right? So the natural language generation models like GPT-3.
GPT, yeah.
So are those types of things now being used or appearing somewhere in healthcare, David, as far as you can tell?
So they're starting to. So look, models like GPT-3 and GPT-J and GPT-Neo and others they're not really used in healthcare yet because as we say, you can't have good enough in healthcare. Yeah. Right? So you can't, translate clinical records or summarize them and come and say, well, this is sort of good enough, okay, for marketing stuff, right? Those use cases are just not there. So even when we do work, so we do a lot, work on question answering, right, on patient records or in some summarization work now, we are looking at things that are kind of, when it works, you need to know that it works, you need to know why it works. Right, and one of the challenges with something like GPT-3 is whatever you throw it, you will get a response, right? So in a sense, it doesn't yet know how to tell you when it doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, it will spew out BS even if as long as it's designed to respond, right?
Yeah, so, exactly. And for us, look, we are focused on production use cases on industry, so that's not useful yet. But I would say we are starting to support those. One thing we definitely have, there's a lot of healthcare specific. Kind of BERT-based models, so those types of language models, word embeddings, sentence embeddings, which we have healthcare specific one, chunk embeddings, which would only want to have healthcare specific ones. Those are used, predominantly across all. I would say the majority of the models we have. But for us, really, one of the things we do is kind of we take care of it for the customers, right? So our customers they do not tune those models. Usually they tune those specific pipelines. So our job is to come and say, look, like, every month we give you, freshly trained, healthcare specific models, right, that you can build on top of, right? And by the way, the updates are also very, very important, right? On, the academic front, you want to take BioBERT and freeze it. In a production setting, you want to do the exact reverse, right? You want to make sure every time there's, COVID, there's new drugs on the market, new terms, your models reflect that as soon as possible.
So, Dia, give us a sense of, the people that you folks work with, do they have data science teams, or do you just assume that most of the people you interact with are just domain experts, so therefore the tools have to be designed for non-coders and mostly for domain experts? So what's the level of sophistication of the typical team in healthcare that you folks interact with?
Well, we do interact with both types of teams. So we also interact with data scientists who want to build their own models or to fine-tune models and to experiment with those. But we also deal with domain experts who need out-of-the-box tools without, which will allow them to fine-tune models and to create models, to train models maybe from scratch or exactly on the documents they
by using so for domain experts, using just a graphical user interface.
Yes, using via user interface without coding, without writing a line of code, they will be able to have access to model training and to model fine-tuning and then to model deployment at the end. So we want to abstract all the complexity behind the data science.
And how so you folks have models in healthcare, and then now I'm in a specific healthcare organization. I have a bunch of domain experts. They're willing to label data. So how much data, what's the rule of thumb? How much data do they need in order to get, I guess it's very hard to answer this question, but just generally, there's a bit of a cold start problem, right?
Actually, they don't need a lot of data to start. but to reach a certain degree of accuracy, they will need iteratively more data, right? So they can start with, let's say, if you have a taxonomy of 10 labels, if you gather 30 or 40 examples for each one of those labels, you are good to go. So you can have a first version of your model and then further fine-tune it with the new documents that you acquire.
With still human in the loop.
Yes, exactly.
Reviewing
keep on improving it. Yes, over time.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so generally, David, the data science teams that you folks interact with, how much model tuning can they do? Because that seems like you have to have some deep learning talent in your team, right?
Yes, but we are doing away with that. So I'd say most of our customers do tune models because they deal with specific data set, right? So if you're dealing with home health data, if you're dealing with dental data, if you're dealing with psychiatry data, right? So for example, Mount Sinai, they published a case study, they do aggression detection in psychiatry, right? So those are specific problems, right? So it's nice that you have pre-trained model to extract, anything and everything, right? Diagnosis, drug, symptoms, but I want a specific thing, right? Or, I'm in cancer, I want 2 more characteristics, right? I'm in radiology, I want, whatever, is a follow-up required. And so data scientists work usually in Python, right? And they want to be able to do that. And then really what they make use of is, first of all, just the algorithms, the actual network that are optimized. But the other thing, there is a lot of transfer learning going on, right? So they reuse embeddings, they reuse some of our kind of baseline models, sentence extraction, parts of speech, some of the NERs and so on. But what we're doing now with our annotation lab tool is really the goal is to make this a complete no-code process so that really a medical doctor can come in and do this because the tool has the transfer learning and the active learning functionality within it. So really it's a user interface. You just load documents. You come and say, oh, here's what I want, right? I'm looking whatever for signs of substance abuse, right? Here are some, taxonomy of 10 fields. I'm looking for, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. Here's the set of things I care about. You start labeling, but you tell it, oh, I want to start with this model. Right, so substances, just start with the general substances model, okay, and I'll correct you from there, right? And every X iteration we retrain the model, and this happens in the background, right? It doesn't interrupt you, we keep versions, all of that, right? And you can look at accuracy, right? There's kind of an analytics dashboard, and at some point you come and say, okay, I think this is good enough, right? And you look at the accuracy and can deploy it. So I think that's really where it's going to go. Because just because of just the specificity of language in healthcare, people will also always want to tune to their own use case. So really, we just want to move away from, yes, you need a data science team to do this, to like, you need, one domain expert, right? And you can make it happen.
Yeah, I do quite a bit of NLP, but my tolerance for error is probably a lot higher than people in a high stakes domain like healthcare, right? So in other words, what I want to be able to do is take a bunch of text and understand what's in the text, but I can tolerate some level of inaccuracy, right? So it seems like Dia, in this domain, healthcare, the stakes are so high that even if you're skilled in NLP, you're probably better off, unless you're full-time working on healthcare models, just working with someone who specializes in healthcare NLP because the stakes are so high.
Yeah, actually, we have a whole team of data scientists who are working just on that. And then we have another team of health specialists, medical doctors and nurses who are very knowledgeable of the domains and of the documents they are annotating. So those two profiles are a must if you want to build models for the healthcare domain and then have good results.
So what do you folks, what do you have specific product features around privacy and confidentiality? Because this is another sensitive area of healthcare, right? So
yes. Of course, healthcare and pharma are highly regulated industries and which work with a lot of PHI and PII information data, right?
So what does that mean in practice? So if you have a bunch of doctor notes, the first step is just to de-identify the notes and then build the model?
Yeah, that will be a good approach for doing that. And yeah, so we offer the identification services on top of the healthcare library. So we have pre-trained models which identify all those sensitive information, and then they can obfuscate them or mask them within the documents. And after that, they can be shared with people who are not who are not the main users or the main doctors, which generated and should have access to this information with third-party entities, right? For annotation purposes, for analysis, and so on. So the first step is the identification. But then another very important aspect is the fact that we offer this software as a licensed software, not as a software as a service. So people don't have to send, or the users or hospitals don't have to send the records, the electronic health records, to our servers for processing, but they can do it locally on their own infrastructure without sharing any data. So,
is that yeah. Does that mean, Dia, that the model they build is theirs?
Yeah, usually, of course. So whenever they annotate the data and they use the library to train a model, the IP for the obtained model is theirs.
So let me ask, so as far as de-identification, that's not healthcare specific. Those don't have to be healthcare specific models. I mean, in other words, there are probably other domains that do de-identification. So the de-identification model is not special to healthcare.
That is true to some degree. For instance, it also depends on which legislation and which regulation you are reported against, right? So if you are looking at GDPR, of course, that is not healthcare specific. But if you are looking at HIPAA, there are several fields which are related to patient information and which are specific to healthcare. All right. So, for instance, diseases have to be sometimes have to be identified inside of the health records, because rare diseases can help you identify the person who has it.
Yeah, I would say in practice, we do see the identification being healthcare specific, because you want, for example, to obfuscate hospital names, professions sometimes doctor names. You need to generalize diseases, right, if there's a rare disease. And then also the specific legislations around the world that tell you what you're allowed to do in different cases.
So, machine learning, AI, there's a lot of talk about it in general, but then when you drill down, a lot of people are in the prototyping stage. They're not really deploying models really, or if they do, only a handful of models. So what's your folks' sense in terms of NLP in healthcare, or the application of NLP in healthcare? It's because as you describe it, healthcare, there's a lot of text, and text is important to healthcare. So do you feel like this sectors, healthcare and the life sciences in general, are further along in terms of deployment and adoption?
So yeah, I would say we probably have a pretty unique window into that, because our focus is almost exclusively at the teams who want to go to production and do go to production, right? And work with several of the world's largest pharma companies and healthcare software companies and health systems who have done that, right? So I think we do have probably a kind of an outsized share of the people who have gone to production. I would say to do that, it's a long process, because
but there's a lot more. There's a lot more sense of urgency in healthcare in terms of not just because they want to move, they want to advance their practice, but also just because of the amount of text, and they just the need is higher, right?
So here's what we are seeing. On one hand, there's as you say, it's mainly text, especially if you look at things like like oncology, like pathology, like mental health, like ER or general medicine. A lot of the relevant clinical information is only in text. That is why, even today, you want to know how many people may have COVID when they came to the ER. Today, you sit down nurses to read stuff, right? These are people still do it. So there's a lot of urgency in that respect, compared to, for example, cyber, where you can get a lot by just reading IP logs. On the other hand, with the healthcare, because of the regulatory concerns, the safety concerns, the way to think about it is everything that other industries do in terms of ethical AI, in terms of ML ops, in terms of testing, In healthcare, you do all of that before you put the first model in production. Right. So what we are seeing, some of the challenges to go into production are make sure the data is clinically valid. How did you test it? Did you look at biases? How do you version models? Have you written kind of the regulatory documents? Right? Are you set up to test what's happening in production? All of that really, and I haven't seen this in any other industry. In healthcare, these are gates before your first model is deployed. Right. So and that's a lot of the work we do is around everything from vulnerability scanning to to privacy to different metrics for testing, right? To that basically how you annotate data correctly, right, and have the right population of patients. So sometimes it makes it seem slower until we have systems that are actually in production. You get feedback from patients, right, or feedback from doctors. But if I compare it to other industries and say, hey, we deployed those 20 models, you look at what they actually did. Well, you didn't actually do all the steps. Right? Because in other industry, you can often afford to come say, oh, I'll just start sending optimized, personalized marketing emails, right, and see what happens, see if it works. Which you generally you just illegal to do, right, in healthcare and pharma.
So privacy and security. So in the broader ML community, they're all excited about all these confidential computing technologies, right? So differential privacy, federated learning.
Mm-hmm.
But it sounds like in your folks' case, most people build models specific to themselves, right? And so maybe some of these techniques don't really map that well into healthcare. For example, federated learning, the idea that you're going to share across different orgs and things like that, or homomorphic encryption, which actually doesn't work because it's too slow. Forget about that one. Yeah. But do you get asked about any of these things?
We get asked about federated learning sometimes.
Yeah.
I think people are experimenting with it. I think that there are two challenges. One challenge is also, and this is also where we play in the ecosystem. We play very close to where people come and say, look, we need to take this into production in the next few months. Right, and I think federated learning is just not quite there.
Yeah.
That's one thing. The second issue is there are a lot of just legal issues with sharing. Right, so in cyber, very often people come and say, yeah, I'll share all my incident report with the industry. Right, let's be better together. In healthcare, people generally don't. Right, first of all, it's just illegal to share patient data with anyone.
Right.
Even with even with consent sometimes. Right. The other thing, there's a lot of IP value, right? People can say, oh, if I share you that, how much will you pay me? Right. And it gets stuck in that way. Okay. The other thing is, the third thing is exactly what you said. Models are very localized in healthcare. Right. So you can say, it's really different than other industries where, if people who bought iPhone like this charger, then, probably people 3,000 miles away buy an iPhone, probably be interested in this charger too, and you can personalize marketing. Right. In healthcare, I mean, it really is not the case, right? If you had a patient that was the right thing for them, you have a patient that's 3,000 miles away, the doctor will disagree with you, the patient will disagree with you, different, medications and treatments be available in the hospital. And even if it were the same, they would write it differently. So it's much more of a, have a good pre-trained model and then make it super easy to localize. At least that's what we are seeing now.
So you folks also have a big open source project, Spark NLP. So Dia, does that matter in the sense that do people in healthcare care about open source, or do they only care that it works?
Well, the community cares, and people in other domain care about this, and they can put it to good use. People in healthcare, well, because of the community that we have built around Spark NLP, now we can afford, to build tools which are used within the healthcare domain, such as the annotation lab or the NLP server. So all those ideas came from the community, right? And this is how they, and now the healthcare domain or the healthcare users are taking advantage of that as well.
So let's close by having David just trying to convince our audience why they should work on NLP. I mean, not NLP, in healthcare. Of all the areas that they can be using their skills in NLP for, why healthcare?
I mean, honestly, what's more important?
Right.
Really, we're working with people who are like literally working on a cure for cancer. And I mean, like on a day-to-day basis, right? Working on precision medicine, right? On how you apply genomic testing to improve better health. How to find patients at risk faster, right? And look, other industries, I've done work before in financial services and e-commerce and other things. Really, once you do one project in healthcare, and you can come and say, hey, I did this little thing, like this thing actually helps people with, acute kidney injury, right? Every day.
And there's, it sounds like also based on this conversation, there's no trade-off in terms of working on bleeding edge models and challenging problems, right?
Definitely. The technology is super challenging. The problems are very, very challenging. You're definitely at the bleeding edge. We are really, I think, for the next several decades, we have a lot to kind of discover together and make happen in the industry. We are very early on. It's very early days. It's super exciting. But really, most people, once you get into healthcare, it's very hard to get out. Everything else just seems unimportant in comparison. But yeah, I can tell you, definitely, the things that I will be proud to tell my grandkids about are definitely, across my career, some of the healthcare projects we've done, where you can come say, we help build something really that actually helps real people on a day-to-day basis in a very obvious way.
Actually, just to clarify in closing, Dia, so everything, when we talk, maybe people get the impression that everything that we've talked about in terms of healthcare NLP only applies to English. So can you set the record straight? So is the work you guys doing, does it cut across languages?
We actually just finished a project which was for the processing of German-based health records. So it's definitely language independent. So the technology can be used for any language. We have started with European languages for the moment because we are more at ease with those, but it can of course be applied to any language.
And David hinted at the fact that there's OCR involved, and possibly in the future there might be the blending of multimodal models, text and vision. So is that something you folks are actively working on, David?
Yes, definitely. Yes. So right now we have two software products. One of them is Spark NLP for healthcare. The other is Spark OCR, which does exactly that. So currently, some of the features it already has that have these combinations are visual document classification, visual entity extraction. So you can look at for specific entities, and really it takes computer vision features as well as NLP features from OCR and combines them. We do table extraction now. We do things like, for example, signature detection, right? Where signature, you have handwriting pieces like date, signature, who signed. That's definitely already happening with OCR, the multimodal models. Yes.
And of course, the best way for our listeners to really get a feel for what's happening is to sign up for the free conference happening in a few weeks, the Healthcare NLP Conference. So I will place a link to the conference in the episode notes. So thank you, Dia and David.
Thank you for having us.